Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. You'll see at coffee hour some of the books left over from the rummage sale yesterday, and I was struck by the large number of them that are some sort of self-help book. Books about how to get the love that you want in this life. Books about how to be successful, how to influence people, how to give good speeches. But probably the biggest category of books were various diet books. All sorts of diets, the Mediterranean diet, the low-fat diet, the high-fat diet, the low-carb diet, the high-carb diet. But my favorite book, my favorite diet book title, with apologies to the fair sex, is Shrink Your Female Fat Zones. And somebody joked that maybe that was more about their husbands rather than... It reminded me of a book that someone recommended for me this summer that I read over vacation a couple weeks ago. The Instinct to Heal, Curing Depression, Anxiety, and Stress Without Drugs and Without Talk Therapy. And I should say at the outset, I am not a particularly anxious person and I'm not depressed. This is not why my friend recommended this book, but rather because of the perspective of the author, whose name is David Servan Schreiber. He's a psychiatrist and he has a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, which is the study of how the neurons in the brain work together to create thoughts and memories and control the body. He says that between 50% and 75% of all doctor visits are related to stress. Stress due often to depression or anxiety or some other kind of sort. He points out that 8 of the 10 most used medications in our country are to treat symptoms of stress, high blood pressure medication, antacids, antidepressants, sleeping pills, and the like. The top 3 prescribed medications in the United States are in fact antidepressants. He says that it's great to have these advances in medical science that create these drugs that can help treat these issues, but he's not sure it's the very best way to treat those. He's also not sure that talk therapy is the best way. And often people resist going to go talk to somebody, and increasingly researchers are showing that in some cases it just really doesn't work for people, it doesn't work to treat various diseases. He points out that the part of the brain that we're most familiar with is the cognitive part of the brain. That's the part of the brain that we use to think, that we use to consciously control our body movements, that we're most aware of. But he said embedded in the cognitive brain is what he calls the emotional brain. And the emotional brain is what creates the emotions that we feel, like anger, sadness, depression. But it also controls parts of our body. It controls our heart, our blood pressure, our digestive system, and our nervous system. But it does that in a way that we're not conscious of and that we can't actively affect. Most of us can't, by just thinking about it, for instance, control our blood pressure. Similarly, most of us, just by telling ourselves not to be angry or not to be depressed, can't get over those emotions. The emotional brain is sort of beyond our ability to control cognitively. He says, however, that the emotional brain, because it is embedded in our physiology, in our bodies, and because it is embedded in the physiological control of our body, can be affected through our physical bodies. And he outlines 7 ways. I'm just going to relay 2 of them because I found them pretty interesting. You've probably heard the term seasonal affective disorder. As the days get shorter, many people have struggles getting up. Many people struggle with depression. I don't particularly struggle with it, but I do notice it's a little harder to get out of bed when it's still dark outside. And in the wintertime, when the days are short, for whatever reason, I tend to crave carbohydrates like pasta more than I do during the summer. You probably have your own things that you notice during the shorter days during the winter months. He recounts research that has shown that the symptoms of seasonal affective disorder can be successfully treated by using what is called a dawn simulator, which is a type of alarm clock that instead of going off with some kind of obnoxious bell or sound, gradually increases the light in the room in the same way that sunrise, it mimics what a sunrise does. And they found that if you after using that Dawn simulator for a few days, some of the symptoms of seasonal affective disorder tend to go away. That it is an effective way of adjusting to the reality of seasons. Interesting, such a low impact, easy to implement solution having such a profound effect. A second one that will make us all groan is the importance and the effects of exercise. Of course, we know this. We don't really want to face up to it, but folks they found in clinical studies, folks who are suffering from depression, suffering from anxiety, other forms of stress, if they can just get on the treadmill or on the bicycle for 20 minutes, 3 days a week, very quickly they begin to feel some kind of relief from those symptoms. Many people who have been on antidepressants for years, if they find they exercise regularly, are able to stop taking that medication, but it has a profound impact on them. A simple intervention we know about, but a profound one nonetheless. I was thinking about these non-medical interventions, these non-medical paths to healing, as I studied the two healing stories in the gospel lesson that we just heard from Mark's gospel. Two stories of Jesus healing people, and they're both pretty fascinating. The first one, Jesus has gone to the region of Tyre. This is the only time in the gospel that he actually leaves the country of Israel. Don't really know why. He's traveling, apparently the gospel writer tells us he's trying to travel incognito, whether he just needs a little break from the crowds, whether he's afraid of the Jewish authorities, whether he's trying to figure out what his life really means. He's just trying to recharge, reset. We don't really know. However, in spite of his efforts to travel without being recognized, someone does figure out who he is. It's a Syrophoenician woman, but the Syrophoenician part tells us that she's from a region even further away than Tyre. She's from a country very far away from Israel. And she's a Gentile, which tells us that she is not Jewish like Jesus is and like the disciples are. The Syrophoenician woman comes to Jesus and she has this problem. Her daughter is possessed by a demon. And I suppose that we could think about that as little Linda Blair in The Exorcist with her head spinning around and all that stuff, but I don't really think that's probably what was going on. I suspect that in the ancient world, when someone had some sort of disease or affliction that you didn't know, that the ancient world didn't really know how to deal with, and that could have been severe depression or anxiety or who knows what, that they would say, because they had a lack of science, a lack of knowledge, they would say that that person was possessed by a demon. The woman asks Jesus to cure her daughter, and Jesus says this horrible sounding thing. He says it's not fair to take the food away from the children and cast it to the dogs. And I don't know why he says this. I have read dozens and dozens of commentaries by biblical scholars who suggest all sorts of reasons, none of which are completely satisfactory. It may be that Jesus was just having a really bad day and it slipped out before he could help us. It may be that Jesus really did believe what he said, that Jesus believed that he was sent to be the Messiah to Israel, to the people of Israel, and not to the people in the countries around Israel, that Jesus' mission was limited to the people of Israel. That may be what he believed. Or it may be that Jesus says this thing to test the woman, says this horrible thing to test her to see how she will respond. Whatever reason Jesus says what he says, the response that the woman gives is masterful. She says, even the dogs get to gather up crumbs under the children's table. And somehow that switches something in Jesus' brain. Either he feels bad about what he said, and he sees life a little more clear, and we've all had that experience happen. Or he did believe that his mission was only to the people of Israel, but he comes to believe that healing is needed all around, and that something that the woman says expands his view of himself and his role in the world, and he accepts it. Or maybe if he said that thing that he said to her in order to be a test, maybe she passed the test. But for whatever reason, he says, you may go, your daughter is cured. I don't know how that cure happened. Jesus didn't touch her. Jesus didn't even meet her. We don't really, it's not clear. Mark does not explain how all this happens, but somehow she is cured. I wonder if somehow in this interaction, the woman and the daughter come to understand who they are more fully. They come to understand that they are children of God. They're able to live into that. and in that understanding of themselves, they come back to the wholeness that is their birthright as children of God. The other healing story is this man who is deaf who also has a speech impediment. And in this case, Jesus does meet him. The man doesn't come for healing, but his friends bring him. And Jesus does this strange thing where he puts his fingers in the man's ears and touches his tongue, and he looks up into heaven and says, "Be opened," and the man is able to hear and he's able to speak. This reminded me of another chapter in the book by David Servan Schreiber about the power of touch. And he recounts that in the 70s, medical science developed incubators to help take care of babies who were born prematurely. And they figured they had gotten all of the things right, the right level of humidity, the right level of temperature, the right lighting. They had gotten everything carefully controlled to provide the very best chance for these young premature babies. And they were very conscious about and concerned about germs and about infections, and so they installed these incubators in these wards, but they warned the nursing staff not to touch the babies because they didn't want to introduce germs into their environment. They started using the incubators, and the babies didn't die, but they didn't thrive, they didn't grow. They just sort of carried along at a plateau, except in one of the wards, where the babies did grow, they did thrive. And the scientists couldn't figure out what was going on, and after an investigation, they discovered that in that ward, where the babies grew and thrived, there was a nurse on the night shift who couldn't ignore the cries of the babies and would reach into the incubators and stroke their backs in the long, quiet hours of the night. And they came to realize that that touch, that human connection, was critical to the healing and the growth of those premature babies. All of the miracles of modern medicine couldn't replace the importance of touch. And there are all sorts of other studies about the importance of touch, whether it is from another human being or from pets, or a sense of connection with other living things, being critically important not only for infants but for all of us in terms of being healthy and being whole. I don't know about you, but I read these stories of healing in the Bible and they always kind of catch me up. I don't really know what to make of them. And it's largely because I've never seen anyone come along, lay their hands on someone, or say a prayer, and seen health return in the way that Jesus is able to do this. I guess I'm just a kind of show me kind of guy. I haven't seen it, and so I have trouble sometimes understanding how to take these healing stories in the Bible. But I think that what they illustrate for us is God's will for us to be healthy and whole. God's willingness to enter in and help us do that. And whether that is through the miracles of modern medicine, whether that is through the more commonplace miracles of human touch, or dawn simulators, or simple exercise, or these other kinds of simple interventions that Servan Schreiber talks about in his book. That God's dream for us is that we will be healthy, that we will be whole. That is our birthright as children of God. My prayer with parishioners who are in the hospital or in other forms of distress, my prayer for Vita, who we're going to baptize in just a few minutes, my prayer for all of us is that God will give us the wholeness, God will provide us and fill us with the wholeness and health that God promises us at our birth, that God promises us as children of God. That's my prayer for us today. It's my prayer for us for all time, that we will have the wholeness and health that God dreams for us. Amen. I invite Vita